This episode of Tottenham Hotspur was recorded prior to Tottenham losing 2-1 at home to Newcastle in the Premier League. It was intended as a snapshot in time and a look back at Tottenham's January transfer window in 2026, and I still think it can be enjoyed and spark some interesting thoughts and conversations independent of what happened in the Newcastle game. With that said, anything that's said about the Lewises right now and Enoch, you can assume would be 10 times worse than what I've outlined here. Same for anything for Thomas Frank, with even less sympathy than I've outlined here. So with that, up the Spurs, we go marching on and enjoy. Or try to enjoy.
Why are there so many podcasts about Tottenham? Do I want to know why? They might contain insight, but mostly delusions. If I hear one more, I might die. They don't like Levy and they don't like Enoch. They pine for...
French economist Frederic Bastiat's parable of the broken window outlines how a shopkeeper's son breaks a window, leading to work for Iglesia. Bastiat posits that rather than creating productive economic activity, the redirected funds to fix the window could have been spent on other, more productive goods. Tottenham Hotspur find themselves with a metaphorical broken window. The club is slipping towards a relegation fight. The players are dropping like flies. The manager is under fire. The board is being doubted. The fans are revolting. And the podcasts are too. Bastiat's parable is intended as a counter-argument to the belief that destruction is good for the economy. But I'm going to combine 10 minutes of Googling economic philosophy with my experience of Spurs podcasts and being a Tottenham Hotspur fan to entertain you lovely podcast degenerates. Welcome back to Tottenham Hotspur, the Spurs podcast about Spurs podcasts. My name's Ian. Thanks for tuning in again. Going to be a bit of a funky one today. I'm going to try to summarize and explore what happened in the January transfer window, how the fan base responded, how we felt. It's a kind of a turbulent time as a Spurs fan. If anybody who's listened to one of my podcasts, or really any podcast, or in fact has spoken to any Spurs fan in the last 2 years, but it's rough. It's really rough at the moment. So here we're going to explore what happened in the January transfer window and whether the Spurs podcast Illuminati believed it to be much more than a literal broken window. I'm going to go through a timeline of events, and if you're interested in this type of thing, I recommend that you check out Spurs from the Stands on YouTube. Sarah did a really awesome job of fleshing out everything that happened throughout January, but also the context leading up to the transfer window itself. I had this planned and spent some time putting it together. I listened to her video and it just made me realize that I did quite a poor job. So go check that out if you get a chance, and then come back and then we'll talk about podcasts for a bit. But essentially, going into the window, things weren't great, but they weren't terrible. The squad was suffering some injuries, but not terribly so. And I got the sense that what the fan base felt we needed was left back or right back cover, basically a full back, so that we didn't only have 3 active guys and Ben Davies, who I think was, just sort of floating around the first team at the time. We needed a passy boy in midfield, a number 6 who could distribute the ball well, and perhaps a left or a right winger to come in and add some impetus to the attack. So going through that timeline, I'm going to start on December 31st. We were 13th in the table with 25 points from 18 matches played. On January 1st, we had that awful 0-0 draw with Brentford, and I don't know if it was technically on January 1st, but Mason Melia joined from the League of Ireland, came in with a back injury. And realistically, he's not going to contribute to the first team this year. On January 3rd, we sold our top goal scorer from last season, Brennan Johnson, to Crystal Palace, and I got the sense at the time that there was a bit of excitement about Spurs actually doing business early. Perhaps this new ownership paradigm was actually going to do something different with with control of the club being seized from Daniel Levy. Podcasters looking back on it are, it's been recontextualized, Johnson's sale, by what happened throughout the rest of the month, but I think that I most strongly identify with Andy on Dr. Tottenham saying that it was questionable to sell him. And my understanding would be that he wasn't in the first team being used by Frank as regularly as we'd like and as probably as he would like. There was an opportunity for him to go and get some minutes. Of course, he's been on the subs bench quite a bit for Palace, I think. And he was also a sellable asset, which we've been crying out for a long time. On January 4th, we drew 1-1 with Sunderland. Kudus got injured in that game and he's been out for months. I'm gonna try to focus on injuries which are dragging on through the end of the window rather than sort of injuries like Odebear around this time, who was out and then came back. It's kind of crazy that Kudus went out. Alasdair Gold looked back on it and said it was crazy that we didn't bring in another forward, but it has given the opportunity for a player like Odebear to, I would say, begin to grow into his own on the right-hand side. In recent times, he's been getting more shots off. I still don't know if his decision-making is where it needs to be in the final third, but you could say that about like all of our attacking play, quite frankly. I don't know if there's excellent decision-making being showed, especially from a 20 or 21-year-old kid. On January 7th, we lost to Bournemouth 3-2. Sarah, in the video that I cited earlier and praised to the heavens there, she claimed, and I sort of tend to agree with her, that this was when people really started to get violently sour on Thomas Frank. That last-minute goal that we conceded to a player that we tried to sign. Bentancur went out injured in this game. He's going to be out for months. I think he had surgery. 3 days later, we lost to Villa, 2-1 in the FA Cup. So another chance of silverware gone. Solanke came back. I think he was on the subs bench for this game. And as Mike, friend of the show on Wicked Spursy, pointed out, these returning players typically need time to get up to speed, and we need to be mindful of that as I talk about the other returning players. Of course, Dom has, as he's had some time to acclimate and get some subs minutes under his belt, he's really hit the ground running, which is great. January 10th, we also saw Richarlison injured for months. Seems to be a sort of a revolving door of injuries in certain positions for us. January 14th, Gallagher signed. So what's that, like a week after Bentancur went out? The general sense here was that this wasn't a priority signing at the time. People were fairly muted on Gallagher's qualities that he would bring to Tottenham. He was just another higher intensity, run around a bit, number 8. We already had Beraval for that. Of course, Bentancur was out injured, so can't really count him. But Pat Matassar as well. Archie Gray to a certain extent were people who guys were worried about minutes being taken away. Certain folks at the end of the window have looked back on what happened and have pointed out, like Stu on CADS and Milo on The Game Is About Glory, that Gallagher is clearly an improvement over Bentancur in this position. And I would say that, yes, his pressing is better. I think he's got a bit more about him moving the ball forward. And I think, he was Chelsea captain, so his leadership is there. And I think that we really need that dressing room presence at the moment. And obviously the importance of signing Gallagher, again, has been recontextualized after Beraval got injured. So kind of an inversion of what we saw with Brennan Johnson and Mohamed Kudus. January 15th, John Heitinger joined the coaching staff to replace the outgoing Matt Wells. He went in December to the Colorado Rapids. January 17th, we lost 2-1 to West Ham. This is when things started to get very, very dark as a Tottenham fan. And Many of us were expecting Thomas Frank to be gone within a couple of days, and that just didn't turn out. Ben Davies got injured in this game, broke his ankle, leg, some part of his lower extremities, and he's out for months, if not for the rest of his Tottenham career. We did see in that game, however, that Yves Bissouma returned from AFCON and from basically being in the wilderness under Frank previously, and he actually had, from what I remember, a pretty good game on that return. January 20th, we got a win, hallelujah, against Dortmund in the Champions League. Of course, in that game, Beraval got injured for several months after a quite nasty tackle by Emre Can. Beraval's been quite unlucky with injuries this season, so it sucks, basically. January 22nd, we had confirmation of the signing of Sousa from, I want to say Santos, young left back. Will he really get minutes in the first team? This was questioned recently on the January 28th Filthy Shambles. Robertson was targeted just a day later, I think. He was rumoured. Andy Robertson coming from Liverpool, experienced left back, tons of quality, presumably rotating with Udogie. So the expectation, I think, from many was that Sousa was going to go out on loan to get some experience. But of course, he's again now been thrown into the fire and is still on our books and with us and getting minutes after featuring for us against Manchester United on the weekend. Yep, so we had the Andy Robertson rumour that ended several days later when Liverpool had their own injury mini crisis. January 24th, we drew 2-2 with Burnley. Around this time, Mickey van der Ven went down with an unknown soft tissue injury. It's been weeks so far since we've seen him. Hopefully he'll be back either for Newcastle tomorrow. I'm not sure if that's been confirmed, or at least the North London derby would be a godsend. January 27th, Pedro Porro was out for about a month, is the hope. January 28th, we lost 2-0. Lost. You see, even when we win, my brain defaults to assuming that Spurs have lost. We won 2-0 against Frankfurt in the Champions League, securing us a top 4 position there and a guarantee of going straight into the knockout rounds and avoiding the punishment playoff. Danso went down injury for months in that game with turf toe. Spence picked up an injury too, I think, and he's got an unknown timeline. That's about a week so far. Pat Matassar returned from AFCON and some illness. January 30th, Dane Scarlett was loaned out. And just a quick moment on Dane Scarlett. There's a lot of talk about him as like this speculative improvement over Randall Kolo Muani, who I admit has had a pretty rancid start to his Spurs career through injury and production in front of the net, especially in the Premier League. He hasn't scored yet, as far as I know. I'll have to check that in the edit. Or I'll just leave it in. A little peek behind the curtain for you there. But I think that Dane Scarlett has been around underneath numerous managers and has only ever really got minutes off the bench. I'm not sure if people are assuming that he'll be the next Troy Parrott or Harry Kane, just based upon the fact he's a reasonably rated Tottenham striker. Did okay on loan at Oxford, kind of lost out on minutes after they changed their coach. Got some goals for the England under-21s. I think he might have even won a trophy with them. But he's gone out on loan up to Hibs or something up in Scotland. We can't. He's never really pulled up trees, Dane Scarlett. You'd like to think that if he really had something about him, he would have been starting a lot more than he has. I don't see much from Dane that compared to, for example, Matisse Tell. I don't see it. I think he's going to be a perfectly good player, perfectly good championship player, maybe lower half of the Premier League. Maybe he'll go overseas like Troy Parrott, but I don't think you can say that he's definitely better than Randall Kolo Muani. I think people just wanted to see him get minutes because we own his contract rather than he being a loanee. But, good luck to Dane. And I can't really fault anybody for being hyped and more excited about a youngster than a guy who's come in and has been the target of the body language experts. All right, February 1st, we had a 2-2 draw against Manchester City that had a good performance in the second half. I think people started to turn a bit on Thomas Frank, just in a minor way. There was sort of praise for him helping turn the game around in the second half. Also still lots of criticisms, of course. February 2nd, we signed James Wilson from Hearts, or at least on loan until the end of the year. He's an academy kid. He's gone straight in. I think he scored. And we ended the window in 14th, 29 points. So what we picked up, 4 points in like 7 Premier League matches. 4 points from 4 draws as well. It's awful. 2 wins, 4 draws, and 3 losses across all competitions across the transfer window period itself. And of course, our issues have rolled into the early part of February too. We lost 2-0 to Manchester United just a few days ago. In that game, Cristian Romero got suspended for 4 games. That's just a travesty and adding to all of the ins and outs that we've seen. And Destiny Udogie also got injured in that game. So essentially, we saw all senior fullbacks injured in January and February. We lost 3 forwards, either through injury or sales. 3 centre-backs got injured, 2 central midfielders. And I agree with Jay Harris on The View from the Lane that this has what happens when you have overplayed players. They're stretched too far, muscle injuries are more likely, they don't have time to recover when they come back, etc., etc. It's just an injuries beget injury situation. And I always think back to Nathan A. Clark talking about how the greatest predictor of injuries in the future are injuries in the past with professional sportsmen. So the net player changes 11 out, 5 in. So that's about 6 players that we lost across the January transfer window. Of course, Radu Dragusin returned to the bench on December 28th and has actually started games now, which is great, good for him. But I didn't include him in my calculation, and you can offset that with Kodo Takai going to Mönchengladbach on a loan. Of course, he never kicked a ball in earnest for Spurs. I don't even know if he's got any minutes for Mönchengladbach, to be honest. A net 15 million euros spent. So, for a team in turmoil, that's not a tremendous amount, is it? So yeah, a lot happened. And of course, what I think you could notice from this is that there were plenty of high emotion events between injuries and sales of kind of beloved-ish players. I haven't even touched upon Cristian Romero losing his mind. Or was it? What do the kids call it? A crash out? He had a crash out in public or on Instagram twice. And all these high emotion events driving the sort of negativity and malaise in the fan base. I think there was little in the way of excitement to be had. Our big signing was Conor Gallagher, and he's okay, right? He's not coming in as a player for us to think, okay, he's elevating us to another level. He's just a slight improvement on what we already had. And honestly, I've talked about this on Blue Sky a little bit, but maybe it's because he hasn't been here more than a month, and maybe it's because he used to be a Chelsea player. But I don't get the sense that he's like a Tottenham midfielder. He's very industrious. He doesn't seem to have that edge that I think I want in a Spurs midfielder. That either that turn of pace or the real nice quality on the ball, or the ability to really pick a fantastic pass or sort of drive a goal in from 30 yards. I don't think he's that type of player. At least not yet in a Spurs shirt. Maybe in a different system he could thrive, and I'll get that feeling. He reminds me, I don't know, a little bit of I don't know, like a Jermaine Genius maybe. It's I don't know. I haven't got it yet. It was a quiet window, basically. There was little to offset the problems that we're experiencing, and honestly, that seemed like a slam dunk for the board, but they didn't pull it off. Some folks have pointed out that there's been no money spent across the league in general. Tom Barkley on the Tottenham Way talked about this. Kat Lucas, writing for the I paper, said pretty quiet window in general. I did sort of spark some thoughts in my tiny brain that Kat talking on Blue Sky that maybe the PSR limits were an issue. Clubs unable to bring people in, maybe they're a little bit hesitant. In other factors, maybe the fact that most big clubs were already in Europe for longer, and some of them having uncertainty about whether or not they'd be in the full knockout rounds of, for example, the Conference League or the Europa League or Champions League. That's all of Europe. I don't know why I put it that way. But really only City and West Ham were busy. I did agree a little bit. Well, I did agree a lot. That's I'm going to put myself out there. Brennan on the Cheese Room, or Bren on the Cheese Room, just asked the question of why not make something happen? Why not be our own agent of change? Like, why did we have to look at others not doing things as a reason for us to not do things? You know, we signed Conor Gallagher, which is, in retrospect, lucky, but no one else is having our specific issues. This was shared by Billy T on, he was on about 20 podcasts this month. I can't remember which one. It was something that Billy said, and folks aren't fully buying the claim that this was an impossible window to buy a player who could have made a big change for us. So did the podcasters think this was a good window? A big fat no. I'd say that the sort of predominant feeling that I got from listening to podcasts this month, especially the review pods that I mainly focused on, was that they were annoyed and scared and desperate and, you know, just thinking about relegation now. Looking back on what I think we probably needed at the start of the window, we did get a left back. Yeah, he's, you know, a baby. He's a teenager. We didn't get a passy boy. We got another, you know, industrious central midfielder, and we didn't pick up a left winger. It's 2 out of 3, sort of, or 1.5 out of 3, maybe. I don't know. It depends on how you want to do your math, or your maths if you're in England. So yeah, I'm only focusing on review pods in the rest of this episode. I did listen to the deadline day pods. I was really hoping for something juicy and kind of funny to get out of it. But mostly they were just desperate and depressing, which is totally understandable. You know, they were looking and going to spend hours behind a microphone paying attention to X, to Instagram, to Sky Sports News, to whoever, hoping to get some sort of crumb, some morsel of entertainment or hope, and it just didn't really come. It was a sense of what is there to talk about when there's nothing to talk about. Lots of focusing on games and just the kind of like the games that had happened, the results, and the general direction of the club at the moment. There was some clutching of straws. I noticed this on Last Word on Spurs regarding Akliouche and whether Monaco had signed a possible replacement from Sunderland. I wonder how much of this was, you know, for their own motivation, or how much of it was to just keep people tuned into a live stream, right? To make it both worth their time financially and from a sense of completion and you know, pride in their work. PureCOYS I listened to as well, talked a lot about Raheem Sterling. He came up a few times because he was a free agent and he was a warm body we could have signed. Nobody really wanted him as far as I could tell. I think Gibbo on Grumpy Old Spurs might have said that he wanted him, and I'm not going to begrudge anybody that. If you look back at the window, we probably needed the body. There was some predictions. People early on in their live streams predicting players. Kate and Jimbo predicted a few players. I won't call out who they were, but they were, you know, rumored for Spurs on in and around the window. And again, I think this is something that is kind of smart. If you think it, say it early to try and get people to buy in and listen to the live stream. So yeah, quiet window. No interesting rumours either. This was pointed out by Tom Barkley and Jon Bass on, again, either on the Big Jon Bass Show. Check it out, it's pretty good. Or the Fighting Cock or the Lab or something. There really wasn't. I can't think of something that something that got me sort of interested in the rumour mill. I've tried to avoid it in general, especially with this pod. I don't feel like getting into the rumour mill is really healthy for me. Yeah, so the ratings in general, you know, pretty poor. was interested that Jay Harris on View from the Lane recently said that he felt people would have been okay if you'd offered them Conor Gallagher, Sousa, etc. But he feels that the injuries changed perception. And I don't think that's true. I think when Conor Gallagher signed, people were pretty disappointed that we were picking up a player who would have A, been better for Ange, in many people's feelings. B, was somebody who wasn't particularly... It wasn't a position of need. And it was just... I don't think anybody really felt that the window would have been okay if you'd offered them those two players only. Jay did feel, though, that injuries changed the perception of the window. Graham on home and away, Tottenham home and away, felt like everything we did was a bit panicky, which I guess I can kind of understand. Looking at moving Robertson forward because Davies got injured, signing Gallagher mid-days after Bentancur going down injured. I get it, but I don't know. I don't know if I fully agree with him. I think if we'd panicked, really, we would have signed Raheem Sterling, or maybe we would have got some loans in or something. We just didn't. Jon Bass pointed out that very interesting point. Go check it out and flesh it out more on his pod. But the league in general was very focused on British talents, people who were proven Premier League players, capable of standing up to the physicality of the league, and I think more than anything else, being capable of getting up to speed quickly. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially if you're a team like Spurs who can't afford to wait 6 months when we could get relegated. So that makes a lot of sense. But then again, you also have a team like Manchester City who are signing Semenyo, who's immediately kicked off fantastically, from what I can tell. And again, maybe that's because they're chasing down the scum in red. I don't know. So yeah. Rated window ratings numerically, I think Billy T and others on Harry Scarf's deadline day pod put it a 3 out of 10 window. I heard somebody on the cheese room call it a 0 out of 10 window. Yeah, not great. I did ask my Blue Sky followers for sort of one word summaries of how they felt about the window. Just going to pull it up now on the pod phone. All right, so we've got Mike Crisley. He's just got basically Captain Kirk with his head in his hands. Matt Spate, hello Matt, he's just written sigh. Janus Costa Rasmussen wrote meh. Owen from Yaps wrote Freddie. I think that's Conor Gallagher's dog. He was a highlight of the window, wasn't he? He was such a fluffy dog. Ben, frankly atrocious, called it indefensible. Polyphil Dinosaur called it fine, and then his not embellished, but is explained because they feared that they'd spend a bunch of money on goons Frank wanted that we'd be stuck with trying to sell next year. So at least we avoided that catastrophe. Bearded Lawyer called it defenestration, so a nice little window joke there. Pierre Chevalier called it arrogant. Overseas Bad Actor has a Captain Kirk. God, I'm going to get kicked out of any nerd circles. Captain, what's his name? Picard. I think I said that earlier. It's Captain Picard who had his head in his hands. The one from Star Trek, the bald guy. Chris Begley called it anemic. Yeah, just sort of, I think that sums it up. It's all just fine to shit, basically. But yeah, is there a sense that one or two players can turn it around, though? Could more have been done? This was questioned by a chap called Richard on the Spurs show. I forget if it was Cracknell or somebody else. My notes aren't that good. The counter-argument somebody pointed out, though, is that you've got examples from the 1990s and Arsenal with Dennis Bergkamp and Wenger coming in and really starting off a period of domination for them, or at least competition with Manchester United for dominance. Theo Delaney on the Spurs show chaps on the Fighting Cock questioned the mentality of the types of players who would join a basket case club such as ours. Basket case in scare quotes there. From a club that doesn't really want to try to push the boat out and actually win anything based upon this window, at least. There are folks starting to look ahead to the summer. And, I'll talk a little bit about the club's perception of what needs to be done in the summer, at least what they're telling us in public. But it is going to be important. if we're not signing players now and we've got this much kind of rot and stagnation within the team, by all means, wait to see who you can ship out in the summer when it's easier to sell, perhaps. When players come back from injury and we kind of know what we're working with. But this, it does need to be a big summer. This was echoed by, or not echoed, but said first by Tim on Dr. Tottenham. He's got no confidence that it will, though. So it's a very disappointing window. I keep thinking about a behavioural article that I read recently. I can't remember if I talked about this in the mental health episode that I did last month or 2 months ago. But there's this concept that you need to look to these small moments through your life to keep catalyzing positive momentum. So things like birthdays, anniversaries, but even mini ones like the start of a new work week, right? These things that just kind of keep you going, keep you moving forward like a shark. And, they keep coming up for Spurs. And we either just don't make a change or we ignore the possibility of making a change to promote positive, momentum and growth. You have the start of the transfer window and we actually sold a player. We didn't sign anybody for nearly 2 weeks. You had the possibility of the FA Cup coming around and being something which could be a shot in the arm, and we get dumped out pretty unceremoniously. I think we had a decent stab of it in that game, maybe, but we still lost. We could have sacked Frank, especially after that West Ham travesty, but we didn't. And now the transfer window shut, and we've just missed another opportunity to keep things going, to turn the ship around, as Thomas Frank liked to talk about. And what worries me is that we are the sort of the only club who are in the relegation scrap, who are not picking up points. We're not going on a run. We're not doing the things to try to stay up. And I just don't think as a club we have the correct mentality in the players, in the fan base, or in the boardroom to know how to handle a true relegation scrap. And I talked about this a little bit on the Crowing Cockerel podcast, which should be out by the time that my podcast drops. I'm just going to take a little sip of water. I'm just going to lampshade it like all of my favourite podcast heroes. Nice little bit of ASMR for you. All right, Romero. Let's talk about Cristian Romero first. I love Cristian Romero. I think he's nuts. I think he's great. He's intense. I think he's clearly liked within the dressing room. I think he's a tremendous footballer. The way he moves the ball around, his footballing intelligence at times can be fantastic. I like how he's got a little bit of devil in him. And I think I like him more at the end of this month than I did at the start. But I'm not. You see, I might be a minority having that opinion. He's had 2 flashpoints that didn't take place on the football pitch. Both of them took place on Instagram. So middle of the month, he put out a cryptic message that was later edited, talking about people who, people who lie, who come out and say things, but they don't actually take blame, defending the players. And then, of course, 5 minutes after the window closed, he called it a disgrace, or as people have said in his native tongue, it would be disgracia. Yeah, I know. Spanish speakers there are probably feeling like that was nails on a chalkboard, but desgracia. I'm trying to do it with some flair. But yeah, it was kind of a disgrace that we were left with about a dozen fit senior players, in his words. It was a couple more than that, but the point remains. And again, just there was some debate about whether this meant bad luck or an actual disgrace. People have very different opinions. I think a lot of it's coloured by what you already think of Cristian Romero. People in general do agree with what you're saying, though. Ali Gold on Talking Tottenham, his new podcast with Ryan Taylor, I want to say. And it is disgraceful that players have to play through injury and illness, and they've been left so short by the club. In terms of people who have expressly supported QT for what he said. You've got Andrew on the Tottenham Depot called it an expression of leadership, and I'm inclined to agree with this. I think this is his leadership style, and I don't see a problem with that personally. Yes, maybe you should be doing things behind doors, but who's to say he hasn't tried to put pressure on behind the scenes and it hasn't worked, and now he's doing it publicly. Perhaps he sees it as a way to defend the players against the fan base who have been particularly aggressive towards him this season. Yet again, booing in the stadium, etc. We don't know quite what's going on. You also don't know if he's agreed with the rest of the squad to say these things in public. I think it does, as Jon Bass shared, again, on one of the dozen or so podcasts I swear I heard John on this month, that he cares as much as we do. He's fully COYS, and that's a good thing. We want players like this. We've had players like that in the past who we've absolutely lionized for similar things. I think back to Eric Lamela being a good example of this. Another Argentinian, of course. Some folks have questioned whether or not it's actually helpful to say these things in public. Tom Barkley on the Tottenham Way, but again, conceding that Romero has a point. Looking towards Romero's own motivations, I want to say Marcus Buckland on the Tottenham Way as well. Kevin on Nice One Cyril, questioning whether or not he feels lied to by the club. Maybe there's a lot of people speculating that there were promises made about investment in the team, etc., when Romero renewed his contract last summer. Again, we don't know. I'll come back to all this in a second. Other people are assuming something more sinister behind the scenes. Danny Kelly on View from the Lane, David Harris on Grumpy Old Spurs. I think he's probably working on an exit strategy for all of this. That he's just setting things up so that he isn't blamed for wanting to get out of this hot mess of a football club. And of course, he probably is, as Jack Pitt-Brooks said, too popular to reprimand. He's beloved by the players, and so if you're knocking down there, that's going to affect the dressing room atmosphere, and you don't want that to happen. The fans are going to be even more annoyed than they already were. So he's probably somewhat untouchable. We don't know if he's been fined or anything. Just had a good talking to. So his reputation has really sort of framed it for many people. Like, if you think that Cristian Romero is a reckless nutcase, then you're going to go into all of this and say, well, he's got sent off at the end of the month. He's missed 37 games through injury and through other things. He makes stupid decisions. Lubo on Last Word on Spurs said it's unacceptable and he's got to go. You got to get rid of him. You got to get rid of Frank. You got to get rid of everybody. And that's all fine. And I don't think that I think everybody's entitled to their opinion on this. I'm of the opinion that I love having a captain at this point in time where we are in such dire straits who is standing up for the club. That's my interpretation of everything he said. I think he is. I think if he really wanted to go, he would just go. Like, he could say all these things, but why would he? Why would he make himself look like a liability to clubs who could sign him? Why would he go out and be a card magnet this year? Again, if he wanted to try and get out, he would be, his best behavior, right? He wanted to show to Real Madrid or Barcelona or Atletico Madrid or whoever, PSG, I don't know, that he's a good boy and he can, keep his head down and they're not going to lose him for days on end. Why would he jeopardize all that? What I think it is, I think this is his leadership style. I think he is passionate about Spurs. Otherwise, he wouldn't have signed. He didn't have to. He didn't have to sign. I don't think winning a Europa League was what changed anything. I think he likes the club. I think he is defending us. He's defending his players, and this is all great. I think it's good, in my opinion. And like I say, I think all of this has made me feel more strongly about him as a dressing room leader than previously. Folks have been comparing him to, I want to say Roy Keane was one of them. one of the names thrown out there, and Milo on the game is about glory was talking about it with Ram, and like there have always been passionate leaders in football. There were lots of different styles of leadership. I remember last year we were complaining about, some of you horrible people out there, were complaining about Son Heung-min being too quiet a leader, leading only by example. Fuck me. That was Ledley King. Ledley King led by example. He wasn't a blood and guts John Terry style captain. They just got on with it. They're Mr. Tottenham players. You don't know what his leadership looks like because he's not leading you on the pitch. Now, maybe I've made this argument before that the fans are part of the ecosystem and you've got to bring us along, but he has been bringing some of us along. It's just questioning whether or not his methods are perfect. Getting rid of him, in my opinion, is, or at least talking about getting rid of him is just, it's churlish to a certain extent. By all means, you can want to get rid of or keep any player you want. I would have argued with people about whether or not you sell Brennan Johnson, whether you try and sell Richarlison. You should. Other people think you should keep him. I don't know. People wanted to bring in Ivan Toney, and I think they're mad. This is kind of what the debate is around football. It's why we talk about it all day long on social media or on WhatsApp or with our friends in the pub or with our families or, with random people in the street when you're yelling at them about why Spurs haven't signed a left winger. These are just things that we do. Sorry, the general sentiment is, and get ready for an excellent segue here, Romero's right, the board is shite. So let's talk about the board and the executives. I think this is where we're going to spend a lot of time now, so strap in. There's, as you can absolutely believe with Tottenham fans, there's a lot of blame and hatred being placed upon the Lewises, Vinay Venkatesham, Johan Lange, not really Fabio Paratici, other than a bit of an eye roll. And this is just business as usual for Tottenham fans, right? It was Daniel Levy before, Enoch. Until they go, fans aren't going to be happy. I'm edging towards that, quite frankly, now. And I've talked before about feeling like I would be okay with pretty much any change now, because I would be able to work it into my own philosophy of being a Tottenham fan. But there's been a lot of annoyance precipitated by Johan Lange's club statement, which came out a few days after the transfer window ended. He sat down with Ben. Was it Ben? Can't remember his fucking name. All right, he sat down with someone from the club. I forget his name. Sorry, lad. He's great. He's the chap who does all the content. Yeah, I mean, Johan Lange was never going to sit down and say, God, I'm absolutely fucking useless at this. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, admittedly, Steve Hitchen did that, but they're not going to sit down and say, yeah, that was an awful window. What were we doing? I can't believe we didn't go out and sign Messi or whoever. And it was just a bit of a puff piece. That's fine. Puff piece was the exact word used by a lot of podcasters. Friend of the show, David Harris, thought that the board believes Spurs fans to be morons and they can go out and say these things in public and we won't remember them or we won't understand what they're saying. We're too stupid to understand that it's difficult to sign players in January, even though it probably isn't if you try hard enough. I think really what annoyed people, though, was the aside from the fact that he went out and existed, was that there were no stopgaps, apparently, that we wanted to sign. Ryan on Talking Tottenham has doubts about this, and you could point to somebody like Paulinho, Andy Robertson, not being long-term signings. And he's right. That we haven't been signing purely long-term players. And honestly, at this point in time where we're slipping towards relegation and obscurity, or at the very least mid-table malignancy, is thinking long-term a luxury we really can afford right now? I don't know if it is. And haven't we been looking at long-term for many windows now? I think those young players need some support. And Conor Gallagher is a step in the right direction for that, maintaining standards, etc. But he can't be the only signing we make in January, or any signing of substance. Fans wanted more communications. Nick on the Fighting Cock said he would have preferred no statement. Flav pointed out what I just said. We've got to get these people out in public. I think it's the fact that they don't do press conferences. They're not held accountable by journalists. If they are speaking to fans, they're very carefully curated fans. So, yes, the puff pieces are good. Showing their faces is welcome. But it needs to be a bit more. Same with the articles being written in the club programs by Vinay Venkatesham and Thomas Frank. These were referenced a lot too, talking about ambitions and wanting to compete on all fronts. It's all bollocks until until proven otherwise. Just a bunch of excuses from Lange. That was Lubo on Last Word of Spurs. He was the guy responsible for all this, Lange, and yeah. A lot of these promises might look bad. Ben Bowman said this. A lot of these promises might look bad at the end of the season if catastrophe happens. The fact that we were arrogant enough to think, hey, we don't need to sign anybody because we're Tottenham Hotspur. Of course, my prediction is that we'll be fine. I think we need to take it seriously as both a fan base and as a club, but I've got this feeling that it's going to go down to the wire, but we'll stay up. That shouldn't be the case for us. That really shouldn't. There's been a lot. There's a lot here that's setting expectations, and Spurs fans are getting sick of it. The start of the season, we saw that Venkatesham's statements were parroted a lot and said, and questioned, where is all this war chest talk? It was just talk, as Milo said on The Game Is About Glory. It's not great. You can't keep telling people that big things are coming and then the big things don't come. It's like promising your kid a huge birthday party, and then when it comes around, it's like, okay, well, we're just gonna go to get a Happy Meal and eat it in the car, or it's like that's not a big birthday. It's yeah, sure, it's something unusual, it's something slightly special, but it isn't living up to the expectations you set. And these people, these communicators at the top of our club need to be more savvy to that. The lads on the Crowing Cockerel suggested that the board believes what they're saying, that they're going to compete on all fronts and they're going to compete for players. But Gallagher aside, they've only been competing with lower half teams for players in many regards. I mean, look at Kudus. He came in from West Ham. Like, you sign lower half players, you get lower half of the Premier League performances. What I found really funny this month, and my dad said this, that I had said this previously, be careful what you wish for regarding Daniel Levy going. The devil is possibly preferable, and I'm starting to hear people talk positively about him. Sean on the Spurs 5 podcast this past week, he talked about a post that, and many others have said this, that Daniel Levy never would have let all of this happen. He would have sacked Thomas Frank back in October. We would have signed some dirge. We would have done something to try to turn this around. The pining for Daniel Levy has been referenced on Nice One Cyril. It's been shared online. It's really quite funny that what he said about us missing him when he's gone, or whatever it was, has come true. This isn't everybody. Rosa on Hometown Glory, pointed out that this is his dire legacy remaining, and I can identify with this too. There was modernization that should have happened a long time ago, and we haven't had that, and it's happening now, and we probably do need to give it a bit of time to really reach fruition, or some sort of working rhythm. But honestly, in the short term, it's not going to get there if we get fucking relegated. Look at me, I'm starting to emote like a Spurs YouTuber. Stav on the Spurs 5, and this was echoed similarly by Jack Pitbrook on View from the Lane. This was an opportunity for the board to show that Daniel Levy was the problem and that they're going to do things differently. And by that differently, they of course mean huge statement investments, getting Antoine Semenyo or Akliouche or whoever. But what I would say is that doing things differently can go two ways, right? It can be splashing the cash in January and getting players in. I would also point out that Daniel Levy had done that previously when we were in trouble. Look back at Harry Redknapp's first January transfer window. We signed back a whole bunch of players that we'd sold, but plus other players he needed, you know, and that really helped that season. So we've done it before on the odd occasion, you know, N of one, etc. But didn't we do things slightly differently? The club are kind of crowing about how differently we did things by not panic buying, apparently, by not signing short-term solutions. You know, this is kind of what they believe is best, and you know, on their heads be it, and on our enjoyment be it. Nathan A. Clark on the Extra Inch talked about how, I can't remember if he did this online or but I think he did it on a pod. But we took out a loan at the start of the year. We leveraged our future assets basically for the loan, and we haven't used it. Others have claimed that this might have been used for wages and other operating costs, but and Nathan might have acknowledged that. I think I saw him acknowledge it. But you know, there's a certain truth to talk about money that we have to spend. And speaking of money, Jim on So Spurs had two business experts on, you know, fancy people with MBAs, explaining, and go check that one out. That's a really good podcast, especially if you like me and you don't know your arse from your, you know, pound sign. But they explained that maybe we don't have as much to spend on transfers and wages as we think. We've got some revenue streams that basically have managed to make us catch up with the spending power of some of the big clubs, but our selling is poor compared to them, and that's basically where you make your money as a football club. So we need more revenue streams, and something that I think will piss off the women's team fans amongst us is that was cited as a way to gain additional revenue to benefit the men's team. I think it was a little ill-advised to put it that way. But of course, you could argue that investment in the women's team, even if it's in service of the men's team, is a net positive for the women's team compared to basically being ignored. I think it's a little arrogant though. But the citation was that currently the revenue is about £5 million for the Spurs women's team, but if you look at something like Arsenal, they're £25 million. So that's all these little revenue streams, the stadium sponsorships, they all add up, and you need them really to do what you got to do. And that's going to be especially true next year if we don't have European football, which, let's be honest, we probably won't. People had issues with the club in terms of how they did things. Graham on Tottenham Home and Away called it shopping at Lidl. You could scout a lot of the players that we've been linked with by just watching the Premier League. Come back to John Bass's point about favouring British players. And there's been questions about who really is in charge. Kevin on nice one, Cyril, saying that. Little pause there for you. Brandon on Cheese Room, Lubo on Last Word of Spurs called these guys novices. They're not football people. And I just want to sort of talk on this a little bit. I'm not entirely clear why people are so wedded to the idea that our CEO, who is basically an operations person, needs to be a football expert. There's this idea that, a bit like Daniel Levy was, that they have a sixth sense for when things need to be done in terms of firing a manager. But honestly, I thought the point was that you have a CEO who, like I said, is essentially operations, like how to run a big organization, and they leave those decisions to the experts, who are the people in terms of, you know, director of football, etc. So I don't fully agree with that, or at all, quite frankly. It'd be nice in an ideal world, and perhaps some of this is a hangover of the chairman of the past, Bill Kenwright's, you know, whoever. And maybe it's also a reaction to us having somebody like Alan Sugar in charge, who was, you know, essentially reviled by Tottenham fans. TC on the Tottenham Depot, Seb on the Cheese Room also talked about Lange. and his kind of charisma. Brian also talked about this on the Cheese Room and has actually met Lange. So tune into the Cheese Room's latest podcast for some discussion there. But they talked about his charisma and the fact he's got little, from what we can tell. He's a very kind of muted personality, and they worry about this and his ability to convince targets to sign and to buy into our product. And there's been a lot of talk about how he's a glorified youth scout, essentially. And on that, Ben Bowman has conceded that. Ben Bowman said, he does have qualities. He's a good talent ID scout, especially his record at Spurs. He's signed some good players that have done well, and as I've pointed out before, I think he's in some ways done better than Paratici. Speaking of whom, many have assumed that he's on gardening leave, including Milo on The Game Is About Glory. Some others have even suggested that he's been working in the shadows for Fiorentina, and you can't really argue with that, quite frankly, considering that one of their players that they signed was Manor Solomon. But yeah, I'm glad he's gone. We never should have signed him. The club are looking to persist with this double act strategy. Obviously, they have no faith in Lange to take it over 100%, and you can't blame them based upon what's happened so far. There are worries that the board has written off the season, essentially. Again, Ram and Milo on Game Is About Glory talking about this, and as have others, assuming that we're just going to kind of piss around in mid-table, and we don't really need to invest any money now to get out of it. But relegation and the Champions League are still in play. The fact that they don't seem to believe that we needed to invest in some regard to either stave off relegation or to go further in the Champions League is a little bit disappointing. And yeah, so generally speaking, the curtain seems to be dropping, revealing the Lewises as Enoch with, a new set of branding. They've been doing it for a while. Some people very early were calling out that this is, this Lewis branding exercise, the Lewis children, etc. Was Enoch all along, but you're hearing it more and more across podcasts that people are referring to the ownership as Enoch and not as the Lewises, which I find very interesting. It seems to go hand in hand with how the fan base are feeling about the ownership at the moment. So yeah, big plans apparently, just not right now. Simon and Kevin on Nice One Cyril talked about these huge summer plans that have been promised are going to basically be thrown in the garbage, the trash, the rubbish, whatever you want to call it, if we're in the Championship next year. All right, Thomas Frank. I've talked before about how he's public enemy number one at times at Spurs. He's up front. He's the guy who goes out and he's on the touchline chewing his goddamn chewing gum with his mouth open, and he's he's in press conferences and he's always trying to say the wrong thing. Bless him. He can't seem to get a formation together. His players are always getting injured. He's really just like he's a calamity of errors in a sort of decent zip up cardigan or whatever. But interestingly, this window and this past 6 weeks or so has seen a shift in fan position and perception of Thomas Frank, and it's not necessarily towards positivity. At times there has been credit given to some of the things he's done with the side, especially in the Champions League. But it's sympathy. You're starting to hear more sympathy come out of the fan base. And not necessarily support for him, but an acceptance that he's here for now, maybe till the end of the season. I'm personally of the opinion that I actually think he might, if he's here until the end of the season, I think he might get the start of next. Especially if Pochettino, who many people are predicting will be our next manager, is coming off the World Cup. I can absolutely see Thomas Frank getting the start of next season. But many people still hate him. Bren on the Cheese Room called him not competent, which I don't know if that's better or worse than incompetent. But yeah, he's still pretty reviled. People don't want him around, but they just know that it's not going to happen now. If it wasn't after West Ham, and it wasn't after that god-awful Arsenal game, then it's not going to be now, as far as we know. Graham on Tottenham home and away sort of summarised this this being thrown under the bus sense, that he had the rug pulled out from under him. How can he build a style without fit players? Gary Diamond on An Echo of Glory has called the team good enough, but Spooky on Filthy Shambles has questioned whether some of these players are actually showing up. Thomas Frank is he's very much a yes man. Stella on Spurs 5 said this. He's towing the party line. He isn't willing to step out too much and criticize the board. He's more than willing to criticize fans, however. But you can kind of understand this. This was pushed back by Sean on Spurs 5 that, look at the managers who have spoken out about the board. Ruben Amorim, Maresca at Chelsea. Like, these guys got shit canned almost immediately after criticizing the board. Like, you can't expect a modern coach who doesn't have the power of a Conte or a Mourinho, who doesn't have that sort of cult around them and currying favour from the press. Whatever you want to say about Thomas Frank's, easy ride that he's got in the press, he doesn't have those industry connections and the love-in that those guys do. He's not going to come out and say, we didn't do enough and this club is broken, etc., etc. It might also just not be his personality, of course. I mentioned Maurizio Pochettino a few moments ago, and he's out shaking his tail feathers again on the High Performance podcast. He does this every time, doesn't he? I don't know whether he does it to keep himself in the limelight a little bit, in the public consciousness in England, but whether he really wants the Tottenham job. He does keep saying, yeah, he wants to win things with Spurs, etc., etc., but maybe a bit like Romero, he just kind of gets what being part of a big club is, and the way you talk about them. People want him back, though. I think that a little bit of that's desperation. There is a lack of other options, and just they want to feel excited again. Some hesitation about whether it would be a good choice, whether or not you should go back to an ex-coach and whether or not it will work out. There is this kind of, not old wives' tale, but this idea, I don't think it's based in reality, that it never works out. We're seeing it in play, though, with David Moyes at Everton. He almost immediately turned them around, and they're better than us now, sadly. But yeah, I think if you want to hear some real positivity about Pochettino coming back, go check out Ricky and George Akalea on Last Word on Spurs talking about him. So coming back to Thomas Frank, he's probably had a stay of execution, to quote Gibbo on Grumpy Old Spurs. He's probably here until the end of the season. We'll see. We'll see whether that works out. I hope so. I don't really want to be having watch parties with Montgomery County Spurs next year, my local club, where we're hoping we don't get beat by Wrexham. All right, so I've gone for about an hour. Let's pull all this together. Let's come back to Bastiat's broken window parable. I'm not really sure if I can accurately apply this theory to Spurs right now. The expert interpretations include how destruction only creates destruction, not wealth. I think trying to think about that too much is way above my pay grade as a lowly podcaster, but I get some resonance from it. Lange, Venkatesham, Enoch seem to be happy with leaving our windows broken for now in favor of fixing them in the summer. Rather than giving money to a glazer to put new windows in, i.e. overpaying for stopgap players, they're gambling on the next best alternative, getting in some fancy triple glazing, I guess. But, kind of unlike the parable, in this case, the shopkeeper has broken their own windows. They've broken their own property. And the opportunity for fixing these windows, fixing the club, and obtaining the next best alternative always existed. There was always the possibility of signing loanees or something this month, putting Raheem Sterling on a 6-month contract, and then not being committed to these players in the summer. Now, of course, I'm talking as the guy who didn't have to make the deals happen, but, theoretically they existed. And then you go out and sign the big player that we, desperately, the desperately been calling out for, the Parsi boy, the explosive, amazing winger, whoever. But we didn't do either. I got sort of low confidence that we'll do either, quite frankly, at this point. But I'm also broken myself. There's another theory, which is that one broken window leads to another. This is how the environment affects behaviour. And this is perhaps more appropriate for Spurs. We've been breaking windows for many years. In this case, it would be bad squad building over long periods of time. And there are concerns that this is a pattern of behaviour that is becoming permanent. Look to Andy on Dr. Tottenham or Jack Pickbrook or many others. There's this idea that we've accepted losing. And not only are we losing now on the pitch, we're losing off of it too. So only time will tell if ignoring this particular broken window was the right choice. There is far more and more talk about relegation being a possibility than there has ever been in my time as a Spurs fan. Even back in the 3 points from 8 games season, that was right at the start of the season. We did just enough to pull ourselves out. I don't really remember particularly well that Jurgen Klinsmann saving us back in 97, 98. I remember it happening. This feels really, really dangerous. So thank you for sticking with me. I'm going on for, like I said, well over 60 minutes here. This was a nice cathartic look back on the window as a whole and on where we are at. If you've enjoyed this, please share it, like it, comment on it, print out the transcript, give it to your granny, read it to kids at the local park, whatever you want to do to spread the good word of Tottenham Hotspur. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Tottenham Hotspur. You can email me with telling me how wonderful I am. You can do that by sending a message by carrier pigeon if you know where I am, or emailing tottenhamhotspur@gmail.com. And thank you all for listening. I hope that I've done a good job of summarising just kind of the sentiment across the fan base. So yeah, keep on keeping on. Keep listening to the Spurs podcast and keep making them too. And I'll keep listening to them. Up the Spurs.